Now the story jumps forward to 1995, a time when the filmmaker Peter Jackson was working to create a series of films based on Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books. However, this initial version of the trilogy looked very different from the series the public would eventually receive. This trilogy involved 3 films, but only 2 of the films were about the Lord of the Rings. The first film was set to be a film adaptation of The Hobbit. While investors and producers admired this idea initially, including Harvey Weinstein, who originally funded the project, there were issues with gaining the rights for The Hobbit. At the time, the rights for The Hobbit were tied up with United Artists, who had been purchased by MGM, a competing studio whose leaders were not willing to work with Jackson to produce a Hobbit film. While Harvey Weinstein did attempt to buy the rights, he was unsuccessful and eventually left Jackson's project. With Weinstein out of the picture, Miramax, a Disney-owned company, decided to help produce Jackson's version of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Disney, however, was unhappy with Jackson's idea of splitting the Lord of the Rings into 2 films, and instead wanted the Lord of the Rings to be condensed into only 1 film. At this point though, New Line Cinema came along and agreed to make a Lord of the Rings trilogy with Peter Jackson, officially spreading the story of the Lord of the Rings into 3 movies, 1 movie for each book. New Line Cinema purchased the rights for the Lord of the Rings, and those movies were thus created. After the Lord of the Rings films were released to massive success, New Line began to ponder the possibility of creating films from the Hobbit book. However, MGM was still unwilling to budge on the idea of working with New Line to create a Hobbit movie, and since MGM held the film rights to The Hobbit, the idea was scrapped.
What else brought you, Lake Man?
Revenge!
Revenge?
Surely you must realize that your success has made you some bitter enemies.
A few years later in 2005, more trouble began to brew. Peter Jackson filed a lawsuit against New Line Cinema, claiming New Line did not live up to their contract and had withheld money from Jackson. This infuriated the heads of New Line Cinema, to the point where New Line co-founder Robert Shea made a statement claiming Jackson was greedy and would never be allowed to direct a New Line Cinema film ever again. But unfortunately for New Line Cinema, Peter Jackson had a new, unlikely ally on his side, MGM. During the time of this lawsuit, MGM had been going through restructuring, which involved the hiring and firing of staff members. At the end of all of this, MGM was under new leadership, and this new leadership was eager to produce a film based on The Hobbit. In fact, this new leadership wanted to partner with New Line Cinema and have the 2 studios create this film together. There was just one problem though. MGM admired Jackson's work on The Lord of the Rings and demanded he be involved in the creation of this new Hobbit film. New Line Cinema was furious at the idea of having to come to a compromise with Jackson, so they denied MGM and continued to fight Peter Jackson in court. During this time of strife between New Line and Jackson, business was not going well for New Line. By late 2007, many of the films New Line Cinema had created were major monetary failures, and the studio needed to find a new source of income, fast. At first, New Line wasn't sure what they could produce that would guarantee a large amount of money quickly, but then, New Line remembered that MGM's deal to co-produce a movie for The Hobbit was still on the table. With their desperate need to make money growing stronger every day, New Line finally decided to stop fighting Jackson and to attempt to repair their relationship with him. The lawsuit was settled, although New Line Cinema never provided their accounting papers as proof that Jackson had been paid properly, so they were fined an additional $125,000. New Line was desperate, so they paid the fine and wrote up a deal with MGM to set production of The Hobbit in motion. This initial deal did not set Peter Jackson in the director's chair, but instead made him an executive producer. This change of position was Jackson's own idea, since he claimed he did not want to compete with his own Lord of the Rings films and would allow a new director to paint their vision for Middle-earth. At the time, no director had been chosen for The Hobbit, and the plan for the films was in very early development. What had been decided upon for this adaptation of The Hobbit, though, was that it would involve 2 films, with each film being granted a budget of $150 million. Pre-production would likely have begun in 2008, and the 2 Hobbit films were scheduled for release in December of 2011 and December of 2012. Unfortunately, this version of The Hobbit would soon run into even more conflict. With the year of 2008 came a new lawsuit against New Line Cinema, this time from the Tolkien estate. The Tolkien estate manages all the properties of J.R.R. Tolkien and also owns their copyrights, including Lord of the Rings.
Oh, señores, es aquí la D. I will take the ring, that I do not live away.
When the initial deal allowing the usage of the Lord of the Rings property was granted to New Line Cinema, the Tolkien estate was promised an upfront payment, as well as 7.5% of all revenue made from the films. The Tolkien estate claimed New Line never paid them their share of the revenue, and instead only paid the $63,000 upfront cost. The Tolkien estate demanded $200 million, and would not allow production on The Hobbit to go through until this lawsuit had been settled. Even with production of The Hobbit being halted by this lawsuit, New Line and MGM still made preparations for the production of the film while the lawsuit was fought. It was at this time that Guillermo del Toro was hired to direct the 2 Hobbit films. The choice of hiring Del Toro was considered a strange yet interesting choice at the time, especially considering Del Toro had once said that he didn't like little guys and dragons, hairy feet hobbits. I don't like sword and sorcery. I hate all of that stuff. So, if Del Toro hated fantasy so much, why was he so eager to work on The Hobbit? The answer lies with Peter Jackson. Del Toro admired what Jackson created with Lord of the Rings and wanted to work on a project with him. In fact, the 2 had originally planned to co-direct a film adaptation of the Halo video game back in 2005, but this ended up falling through. This time with The Hobbit was Del Toro's opportunity to finally create a film with Peter Jackson.
You know, I wake up every day, I go
You're
to
living
see,
in reverse.
Absolutely. I rather do it like that. I go to see friends that I admire and that they are incredibly dear to me, and I spend all day with them creating monsters, creating cities, in love with the same narrative. And just, you know, when Peter, Fran, and Felipe and I are in the same room, it's all like when you're a kid and you say, and then the eagle comes down, and you know, it's really that energy. Except we have a very well-financed sandbox.
Yes.
We have the toys.
Yes,
so
it's all there.
It's a unique opportunity. I mean, I think this is. I must have done something right in my past lives, because this is major dharma.
By August of 2008, the lawsuit between the Tolkien estate and New Line Cinema had been settled, with New Line agreeing to pay the Tolkien estate $38 million, a deal the Tolkien estate found to be agreeable. Thank you for watching this clip from our mini documentary on the production of The Hobbit. If you would like to watch the full documentary, select the icon on your left now. You can also watch another clip by selecting the box on the right. Make sure to follow us on social media for more behind the scenes content, and to like and subscribe to support Production Chronicles. You can also help support Production Chronicles monetarily with a tip, or you can purchase film-inspired merchandise. All links are in the description. Thank you again for watching and supporting Production Chronicles.